In 2004, director Clint Eastwood and star Hilary Swank gave the world a film that challenged both society's morals and the structure of the sports film.
In 2019, the Isle of Scotland gives us a whiskey sure to challenge our expectations for a blended Scotch.
The film is $1 Million Baby.
The whiskey is Monkey Shoulder.
And we'll review them both. This is
the Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey.
I'm Brad G.
I'm Bob Book.
And this week, we're looking at the 2004 film, $1 Million Baby.
And today we're being joined by a special guest sitting here to my right, the wonderful Jen Lowers. Jen, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, fun fact, I go back, way back with Jen. We met...
How far back do you go?
We go back to like second grade. We go back to when we were known as Jenny and Bobby.
Yeah.
That's how far back we go. It's been a minute.
Bobby Boucher?
Yes, absolutely. So Jen is a PhD student at Kent State University studying the coolest, like her dissertation topic, her research area is the coolest research. Can you shine a little light on what you're doing at Kent State right now?
Yeah, sure. So I study the reading and writing that people do outside of school, predominantly in their homes but even in situations like this.
Yeah.
So this is something I would study right now. And I study media and...
So when you say reading, you're not just talking about like books or written text. You're talking about other alternative sort of media.
Definitely. I study different text types. So movies, music, video games, art, text messages, social media, all of those things to me are reading and writing and things that I would study.
So we have a perfect guest for the podcast today.
That's literally what we're doing.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
One of those mediums being film.
So let's talk a little bit about this film. Have you ever seen $1 Million Baby, Brad?
I have never seen $1 Million Baby before this viewing.
Till just now.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the Best Picture winner of the year 2004. Next week, actually, we're going to be talking about another Best Picture contender, The Aviator. And so these two movies went up against each other. It's going to be really cool to see what we think of $1 Million Baby versus The Aviator. But for today, we're talking about what most people consider to be Clint Eastwood's masterpiece. What were your initial impressions on the film, Brad? And can you summarize it for us?
Yeah, so a quick summary of $1 Million Baby. So the main characters are played by Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank, and Morgan Freeman. And the basis of the story is that Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman own a boxing gym where they train some boxers. And Hilary Swank is mostly out of work waitress in I believe it's the LA area.
Yeah.
In LA, who doesn't have any money. And she's from the deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, something like that.
It was like the Ozarks, but I don't know, wherever.
Well,
she's from somewhere,
the deep South,
somewhere podunk.
The deep South, either way. And so, long story short, Hilary Swank wants to become a great boxer. Clint Eastwood points out the difficulties in that. She's overage. She's not young enough to do this. But she just has this fire and drive and passion to become the very best.
Yeah.
And so the movie is about Clint Eastwood trying to manage her and train her and push her away. He doesn't believe in her for a lot of the movie. It's about their adventures together.
It is about their adventures together, and I'm really glad that you have not teetered into spoiler territory. Although, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know, and this is your official warning, we are going to get into heavy spoilers for $1 Million Baby. It has been out for 15 years. If you haven't seen it, that's your own fault at this point.
Go watch it now. Turn the podcast off. Watch the movie, and then come back
as we talk about spoilers.
Yes.
So, when you went into this movie, Brad, speaking of spoilers, we're talking about one of the biggest sucker punch endings of all time, right?
Oh,
I mean, what a twist. Did you know anything about this movie going in?
I knew that it was about boxing.
So you had no idea where the twist was coming?
Absolutely no idea. And especially going to a boxing movie, you know, what movie do you think of when you think of boxing?
Oh, Rocky. For sure. Yeah.
So with the Rocky movies in mind, which, you know, the Rocky movies have their own twist with him not winning the first match and stuff like that. But when you go into this boxing movie, you have a specific sports narrative that the person starts off and they're a nobody. They get trained up by an old wise mentor that helps them become the best.
Right.
They have some sort of personal flaw or failure that keeps them from being the best. They overcome it and win the title.
Yeah.
And this is not almost what happens. Almost what happens.
So, flashback to 2004. I am going to the movie theater with Jen to go see this movie.
You and Jen saw this together.
We saw this together.
We did.
I'm pretty sure we did, actually. And it was the first major movie that I had ever had spoiled for me on the internet. I remember I was reading a review and they were like, oh, we're going to give away the ending. And me being a dumb, 14-year-old, I was like, oh, I can't. I mean, what's the ending? Maybe she loses. No. I had the whole...
She does, in fact, lose.
It's terrible. I had the whole movie spoiled for me going in. And so I have never felt like I've been able to fully appreciate this movie. Jen, did you know anything about it going in?
I didn't, but I do remember now that you said that, you saying, I know what happens, and I can't say, but...
Yeah.
So you didn't spoil it for me.
Yeah, but I kind of tipped you off by saying, I know what happens. I can't say. Well,
Bobby Book was the worst.
He was the worst. The worst. All right, so this is Clint Eastwood's movie, right? I mean, he's the composer of the music. He's the director. He's, the lead actor in the movie.
I was blown away that he was the composer. Literally, the credits were going down, and I saw that he wrote, a lot of the songs in the movie.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed.
I actually think it's probably his best score. He's done quite a few of his own movies.
It's amazing, really.
I think so, too. And the thing with Eastwood is, he went through his phase where he wasn't really viewed as a serious force in Hollywood. He was, the man with no name in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns. He started directing his own films, but they were mostly action films or something that was considered more slight. And then 1992 rolls around. He directs Unforgiven and wins Best Picture. He wins Best Director. He's a force to be reckoned with as a filmmaker now. And I think that there's this long stretch of Eastwood's catalog where he focuses on these big morality tales, starting with Unforgiven and ending maybe here or a couple years later, with his war movies. This falls right squarely into what he was doing at the time. He's trying to tell a very morality-based story and wrestling with ethics in the real world. So what do you think of...
Well, do we want to get into what happens?
I think we should. We might as well just say it now.
Okay, so spoiler alert. The final big fight of the movie, Hilary Swank has been fighting her way up through the ranks, and she finally gets to the point where she is fighting for the championship of her welterweight or featherweight or whatever she's in. She's fighting to become the champion of the world. And she's fighting this, I believe it's a British-Jamaican boxer.
Yeah. No, German, right?
Was she German?
They called her the something of Berlin, right?
Yeah. So anyway, she's fighting this boxer who is known for being extremely dirty. As soon as the ref turns around to, say anything about points, she'll jack you in the face. And so at the end of the fight, I believe to me, it seemed like they were about to announce Hilary Swank the winner. And then the other boxer turns around while the ref is turned away and just jacks Hilary Swank in the face. Hilary Swank falls into her corner where they were putting out the bench for her to sit on, and she breaks her neck and becomes paralyzed from the neck down.
By the way, to me, as a woman, that's a perfect metaphor for how other women kind of try to take each other down in positions of power.
Yeah.
Instead of helping each other and kind of building each other up.
So I want to get into this a little bit, and let's just totally spoil the rest of the movie. So she's a quadriplegic. She's lying in bed. She develops sores. Eastwood sees her deteriorating. He's wrestling with, do I mercy kill her, essentially? And she asks to be sort of put out of her misery. He says no at first. She tries to bite out her tongue and commit suicide. And finally, he comes to understand her quality of life is going to be so low. I can no longer tolerate this morality that I've been dealing with and that I've been receiving from the church. I need to do something that's going to basically set her free. And so he does. He kills her. And the end of the movie is kind of ambivalent or ambiguous in terms of, is he redeemed by that act or is he lost as a result of that act? And so it opens up a world of super difficult ethical conversations to have. But the first one I want to talk about, and this is something that Jen was talking to us about off air, is this movie's treatment of women. And I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about it, because there are very few female characters in the movie, and it's a big plot point that Eastwood doesn't train girls. Girls aren't really welcome at the gym. And so the only females you see are Hilary Swank, her family members who are female, and then the boxers that she faces.
And I suppose another character that you don't technically see is Eastwood's daughter.
Right, because in the movie, he has an estranged daughter.
That he writes to every single day trying to reach back out to her, and she keeps sending the letters back unopened.
Right. So, okay. Thoughts on the general treatment of women as characters in this movie?
So in kind of exploring this movie and looking at what the critics said, I always try to kind of compare my own views to what other people say. And one of the things I noticed is that a lot of people criticize the portrayal of femininity in this movie. So that was something that I thought a lot about while I watched it. One of the arguments that's made is that this movie only showcases women in a negative light, in terms of femininity. So the only characters that have kind of what we perceive as traditionally feminine characteristics, like wearing makeup and dresses and stuff, are actually Hilary Swank's family members.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So, and she has no meaningful relationships with any other female characters who are portrayed in a positive manner. For me, I can think of plenty of movies that don't portray masculinity in men in a positive light, so it's not a problem.
Right.
But I can definitely see where they're coming from with that. Another criticism that's been pointed up is that this movie buys into white male authority and female submissiveness, and ultimately promotes submissive dependence on a strong white man, who is Clint Eastwood.
Interesting. And I think this is a good place to jump back into what we think of the performances and the script, because I think it plays into both of those. So, I don't know. Let's go to performances first.
Well, in relation to what she was saying with Hilary Swank's performance, I think part of it is possibly just being from a Southern culture that is very much so a respect-based culture.
Yeah.
You know, throughout the entire movie, she keeps calling him boss.
Right.
Hey, boss, what can I do better? What can I, and she keeps calling him boss. It makes him frustrated. But in the end, I think it is kind of part of that Southern culture of respect that she just grew up in. And then on top of that, you also have the boxing culture of your trainer is always right. Your trainer knows what to do. And so there is that sense of, is it a male dominance, or is it just kind of the culture that she was in, whether or not that's right that she should be treated that way and treating him that way. But that's just kind of where she was. I
agree with you. I think it is just part of the boxing culture, but definitely something interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay, so here's my hot take, and I want to get your guys' opinion. Hilary Swank wins the Oscar for this movie, and she put the work in. She did the Robert De Niro in Raging Bull thing. She went method. She gained 30 pounds of muscle. Is she good in this movie, though? And I think part of it, and we're going to get into the writing, I don't think she has much of a character. She's really submissive. She barely talks. And then you see her being determined and having a will to do things, and that leads to her death at the end, and her desire to die. But I don't really know that I saw that much range in her performance. And maybe that's a result of not having a character written for her. You can please disagree with me if you do.
I think it's because she doesn't have much range, because she hasn't had that many kind of diverse life experiences.
Sure.
That I was literally thinking the exact same thing as Jen was saying that.
So you think it's an intentional thing that she's playing as an actress, and not a limitation in her own acting ability?
Especially after having seen her in films like Boys Don't Cry.
Yeah.
And other performances she gave that were really amazing. I think it's
The Core
intentional.
With Aaron Eckhart, the greatest film of all. No, I understand what you're saying. There's something about her character, and maybe it's the fact that the onus is kind of on her. They're putting all the weight of female characters on her in this movie. We talked about it with Goodfellas a little bit. When there's only one major character who's a female, they have to carry the weight of everything.
Femininity.
Absolutely.
That's one of the criticisms of this movie by feminist scholars, is that she has to give up kind of every aspect that's feminine in society's eyes in order to be able to be successful, or have a chance at success, rather.
Interesting. So this is where I want to get into the writing. So the writer of this movie is Paul Haggis. Paul Haggis went on to write and direct the Oscar-winning Crash the following year after this, and he's kind of become a pariah in Hollywood now because of his association with Scientology and just being a general dirtbag.
So Tom Cruise has the Scientology, but not the dirtbag part?
Not so much the dirtbag,
okay.
That we know of. think this is an awful script. And I know I'm in the minority, but like, I think the writing in this movie is so heavy-handed. Everything about it is like Paul Haggis he loves doing that thing where Morgan Freeman, as the narrator at the beginning of a scene, he'll say a line. And then at the end of the scene, he'll say the same line again. And it's like, oh, see, it has a second meaning now. And after like the fourth or fifth time where Morgan Freeman was like, some cuts are too close to the bone, I was like, all right, dude, we get it. We understand what you're saying. And the way he writes his characters as just these sort of unnuanced black and white. I'm primarily thinking of Hilary Swank's family, like the, quote unquote, like trailer trash family, and the way that they have no level of nuance to them. That I don't know. Was it necessary for the movie to have characters like that? What do you guys think of the script?
I think everybody had followed the stereotypes that exist for them.
Yeah.
When I think about the movie, as much as the movie is about Hilary Swank, I think it's more about Clint Eastwood and his development as a character. And I genuinely think that all of the other characters in the movie, whether it's Hilary Swank, Morgan Freeman, or her hillbilly family, they are all people for him to bounce off of,
right,
as he changes. Even the Catholic priest that he talks to, the Catholic priest never changes. He's always kind of harsh and belittling towards Clint Eastwood. And so I would say the movie is more about Clint Eastwood changing, because he's the only one that really changes by the end of the film.
It really is the movie is about his arc as a character, even more than it is about Hilary Swank's arc as a character.
So I guess that's where we look at Hilary Swank's performance, and do we look at it and say, yes, there wasn't really as much range as we might hope for, but there was a depth of determination in her character that was genuine.
Yeah.
I think that's what I love most about Hilary Swank's character, is that there's nothing about her that came across as fake.
Yeah.
She so genuinely wanted to be a great boxer, and you especially saw that when she told Clint Eastwood, like if I don't have this, what am I doing?
Right.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think she has a lot of childlike qualities that kind of makes her the perfect person to bounce off of Clint Eastwood and have him try to get redemption.
For sure. Yeah, they definitely play them as opposites. He's the hard, grizzled, cynical, jaded guy, and she's optimistic.
If I take you on, you don't say anything. You don't question me. You don't ask why. You don't say anything except maybe, yes, Frankie. And I'm going to try to forget the fact that you're a girl.
That's all I ask.
And don't come crying to me if you get hurt. All righty.
We got a deal.
No, not quite. I'm going to teach you how to fight. Then we'll get you a manager, and I'm off down the road.
Well, I hate to argue with you, but...
Don't argue with me. That's the only way we're doing it. I teach you all you need to know, and then you go off and you make $1 million. I don't care. You get your teeth knocked out. I don't care. I don't want to hear about it either way. That's just the way it's going to be. It's the only way I'll do it.
But then, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, because we're going to have a really interesting talk when we try to analyze this movie. But that leads into a question of, what's the message of this movie? Is Clint Eastwood just his character right? Is it that you never open yourself up to anybody because you get hurt? Because that's what they say at the very beginning. And it's the line that's like the motto of the film, always protect yourself. And every time that comes up again, you see somebody opening themselves up, getting hurt, whether that's physically in a boxing ring, emotionally by trusting someone. You get that early scene where Eastwood is training a fighter and he won't give him his title shot, and then the guy leaves. And they say again, always protect yourself. It's like this constant theme that Eastwood doesn't want to be vulnerable because he knows he'll get hurt. And in the end, he's kind of proven right.
Well, the real question is then, if always protect yourself is kind of the core of the film, at least it's Eastwood's core philosophy that drives him throughout the film.
Yeah.
Was his murdering of Hilary Swank at the end of the movie protecting himself, protecting her?
Yeah, and I think that's open to interpretation. Exactly. Well, and that's where I struggle with this movie, because it's like, is it open to interpretation, or is it just poorly written?
I think it's open to interpretation because he's sitting in the diner at the end.
Yeah.
So they're like, Morgan Freeman's character Eddie's like, he never even left a note. I didn't see him. He just left suddenly.
Yeah.
Then they're showing him in a diner. I think that leaves it open to interpretation because he had so many positive experiences in diners with Maggie.
All right, so that diner scene, I think, is a really good sort of microcosm for the whole film, because you're right, he does have a positive experience in there. And that's why, in my mind, the movie is trying to say that when Eastwood did what he did, it was actually redeeming to him.
I think so, because do you remember the conversation in the movie that said they were having that conversation about him potentially buying a diner?
Yeah.
I think it leaves it open to interpretation that he maybe did use his savings, decide to abandon the boxing gym, and then buy the diner. There's because if you think about it, that's kind of the beautiful part of that end scene for me, the ambiguity, because the fact that he's sitting in the diner doesn't necessarily mean that he owns it, that he bought it.
Yeah, he could just be floating around as like this broken shell of a man. Yeah.
So we don't know if he's broken and he's sitting in that diner because he's heartbroken about his loss.
Right.
Or if he's sitting there because she changed him so much that he was able to seize the moment and actually use his savings to purchase a diner and leave that. Because she kept saying, oh, I really can see you just relaxing, eating some pie, reading your books.
That's interesting, because then she becomes kind of a martyr figure in that way. That she had to die in order to kind of purchase that, that salvation for Clint Eastwood, if you will.
Yeah, I wonder if him being able to release himself from Maggie, who is his daughter figure.
Absolutely.
He was able to release himself from writing those letters to his daughter and move to another place that's far away from his daughter and buy a diner and move on it. And in a sense, coming back to always protect yourself, I think that writing those letters every day was in essence opening himself up to be hurt.
Sure.
Every letter that he wrote to his estranged daughter opened himself up to be hurt another day in a row of another letter returned without any love or relationship being poured back into him. So once again, does he go to the diner and buy it? And he's protecting himself from that hurt. And Hilary Swank allowed him to come to that place.
Yeah. What are some of your other favorite scenes in the movie? Anything that sticks out to you?
I loved Morgan Freeman's 110th fight.
Oh, can we please talk about that scene? Because that's one of the most problematic scenes in the movie for me.
Really?
I can't wait to talk about that. I was confused about what they were trying to do with that scene. So in the context of the movie, you've got this character, Danger, who is clearly like developmentally disabled, right? And Morgan Freeman is kind of being protective of him. And there's this fighter in the gym that's training for, like a really significant fight. And he's really cocky and he's a jerk and he picks on Danger. And basically they set it up so that Morgan Freeman has to be out cleaning a bathroom. And this fighter is beating up Danger, like brutally beating him up. Morgan Freeman, who's an ex-fighter, comes out of the bathroom, takes a glove off of his own hand and just bare hand knocks this guy out. And that's his 110th fight that he never got to have. My question about that scene is, like, what function is that serving in the movie? Because if you notice, that scene happens and then Hilary Swank's fight happens immediately after that. And I feel like they're trying to play those two off as a comparison contrast. And that's where Hilary Swank gets paralyzed. And it's very clear that they're trying to make Danger and Hilary Swank like comparable characters, and yet completely different things happen to them. So I don't know, like basically Morgan Freeman saves Danger.
Right.
But Clint Eastwood isn't able to save Hilary Swank. She comes out of that paralyzed.
And interestingly enough, Danger leaves the boxing ring or the training gym afterwards. And after Hilary Swank
dies,
come
back. Yeah, he doesn't
He comes back after she dies, though.
Right. As like the new
Hilary Swank.
Maggie. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but I don't know what it's trying to say. Are they trying to contrast those two scenes? Because if they are, they're not different enough. If they're trying to compare them, they're not similar enough. Is it just about like the meaninglessness of this all, where sometimes good people get hurt and sometimes they don't? Sometimes you can't protect people.
Could it possibly just be a cheesy scene that they wanted to give Morgan Freeman a little bit of redemption?
Until you asked me if those two scenes had a relationship, I didn't see them as related. When I watched them, I honestly thought, okay, this is like one of those crowd-pleasing scenes for the theater.
Yeah.
Where somebody, everybody, someone says something kind of funny and everybody in the whole theater laughs.
Right.
This is like one of those crowd-pleasing scenes where we've all been wanting to punch that guy in the face for the whole time we've been watching the movie.
Right.
So Morgan Freeman just goes, you know what? I'm done with this. And
Yeah.
he puts on the glove and he goes over and he does what we as audience members wanted to do the whole time.
Right. Yeah, and maybe that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm just reading into it too much. But it was fascinating to me to see that scene back to back with Hilary Swank's prize fight.
I think the problematic part about it from a writing standpoint,
Yeah.
from what you just said, is that especially in some scenes of the movie, like the opening scene, they do cut back and forth between two different scenes.
Right.
So it makes them seem related. So as a writer, we're expecting that already because it's already happened so many times.
Yeah.
But then we get to that scene and they're cutting back and maybe they don't seem related. I think that's just a flaw in the writing.
Thanks a lot, Paul Haggis.
Way to go, Paul.
Well, guys, I don't know about you, but I think that we should taste some whiskey. Let's get to this monkey shoulder. What do you say?
Good old monkey shoulder. Let's do it.
All right, everybody. Time to try some whiskey. Jen's going to sit in with us on this whiskey tasting. And today, it is a momentous occasion. We're moving out of the world of bourbon into the world of Scotch. Brad, what do you know about Scotch?
Scotch. Down in my belly.
We don't know much about it. Jen, are you familiar with Scotch at all?
Definitely not.
Yeah, I'm not really a Scotch drinker either. And I feel like people are either bourbon drinkers or Scotch drinkers. And I've just always remembered the Scotches that I've tried taste like someone extinguished like a cigar into them.
Yeah, from everybody that I've ever heard talk about it that doesn't like Scotch says it tastes kind of like turpentine. And I'm not fully sure what turpentine like smells like, but I don't think it's a good thing.
No, I don't. I also don't think it probably tastes very good. So the thing about Scotch is that it has its own lingo attached to it. If you pick up a bottle of Scotch and read all the description of it, it's like code for something else. And today we're trying a Scotch that's called Monkey Shoulder. It's a really popular blended Scotch. Now, what that means is that they have gotten whiskey, Scotch whiskey that was made at 3 different distilleries, and they've blended them together to make this whiskey. But you'll notice that the description is it's blended malt Scotch whiskey.
What's a malt, Bob?
Now, when you see the word malt on a Scotch, what it means is that it's all barley. Like the mash bill is all barley. That's what malt means. So like if it would have said blended grain Scotch whiskey, it was like a mix of grains. Kind of like with your bourbons, how you could have 5 different grains in there. But this is all barley. And I'm pretty sure that I can smell all of that barley when I put this up to my nose.
It's very peaty.
It definitely is peaty. So the proof on this is 86.
So it's not crazy strong.
Not crazy strong. Brad, what are you picking up on the nose here?
It smells so much different than bourbon. And that might be the most
really
amateur take that you'll ever hear on this podcast. But it's like fascinatingly different.
I visited a guy in Tennessee a few months ago, and he gave me some moonshine, like real moonshine.
Yeah.
This smells like moonshine. It's crazy the amount of just like harsh alcohol coming off of this right now.
Which is funny because you wouldn't expect that from something that is an 86 proof.
No, not at all. Jen, how about you? What do you think of this?
It smells sort of like bourbon had a baby with gin.
Oh, that's actually a super good description.
Yeah, I really agree with that because gin does kind of have that biting nose to it.
A little bit hairspray-y.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not picking up like any sweet notes on this at all.
No.
Like
No.
You can tell this is going to be a Scotch whiskey.
Yeah, there's no caramel, there's no vanilla.
No, not at all. Well, you guys ready to give it a taste?
Let's try it.
Yep.
Oh, it's sweeter in my mouth than I thought it would actually be. Pretty smooth. It's got a little bit of oh man. After I swallowed, as I'm breathing out, I can smell the smoke coming off of my tongue right now.
I'm a fire dragon.
Wow.
It's kind of like spicy, but florally.
Yeah.
There's definitely more flavors than I expected. You bringing up the floral is very accurate because in the bourbons, I've never really picked up on any of the floral hints.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you kind of get maybe a blackberry-ish, blueberry kind of feel to it.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not getting any of that, you guys. I'm just getting like smoke and then like it's tempered by a little bit of sweetness.
Well, it kind of tastes a little perfumey, but
Yeah.
in the best way possible.
I like this. I'm not gonna I wouldn't mix this with anything. This is the kind of whiskey that you drink neat or you don't drink.
So as it's sitting on my palate, I feel like I'm getting the flavor of like hamster bedding. Like I'm serious though.
Extra harsh on this.
I worked at a Pet Supplies Plus for a long time.
Yeah.
And so I smelt a lot of like guinea pig and hamster bedding.
Yeah.
And I genuinely, as it sat on my palate, I was like, I had this memory of like moving hamsters.
So what do you guys think about the finish on this? You were talking about as it sat on your palate.
It genuinely tastes like hamster bedding. And I don't know if that's a terrible thing, but it sounds like a terrible thing.
I didn't get a lot of smoke like when it was in my mouth, and then I swallowed it, and it's all smoke.
You're right. The smoke kind of lingers in the back of your throat.
Yeah.
Almost like it's puffing out a little bit. Mm-hmm. And like making the back of my throat kind of...
If I was going to smoke a cigar while drinking whiskey, this would be a perfect match. But Brad's over here experiencing the smoke right now, too.
I'm trying not to cough.
And it's definitely, we've talked about how some of our bourbons have warmed us on the way down. Like, this is a lingering finish all the way down.
I wouldn't say that it burns going down the way like Jack Daniels would, but it has a nice burn to it.
Yeah.
It's a lingering burn.
Yes.
For sure. What about the balance overall for this whole thing?
I guess with the overall balance, I would say that in a good way, it's not balanced. It doesn't smell like it hits your palate.
Right.
And then once it goes down, the finish is different than the taste and the nose.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good movement from each piece to the next.
I thought the nose was kind of offensive. Like, it stuck out the most.
Agreed.
The taste, I was really happy that it was sweeter than I was anticipating because it smelled like it was going to taste like pure alcohol. It tasted sweet, and then it finished smoky. So you're right. There's three totally different things going on. I don't know if that means that the balance is terrible or that it's a really complex blended Scotch.
Yeah, for me, the movement from the harsh nose to the sweet... Well, it's hard to say sweet. It is not as sweet as a bourbon.
No.
I'll just say that right now. But the move from the harsh nose to the sweeter taste to the smoky finish worked really well for me.
I think the stages balance each other, but it's not all balanced at once when you taste it.
For sure.
Yeah. So let's go through and score it.
Yeah.
What would we give for the nose? Jen, what do you think?
I'd give it a 9. I actually really liked the way it smelled. I was like, okay. But I also like gin and bourbon, so I was sort of excited about the love child of that.
I thought the gin comment was actually really perceptive because once you said it, I couldn't not think of that anymore. Brad, how about you? What do you think about the nose here?
I was not a huge fan of the nose. I think it kind of assaulted the senses really quickly, so I'm going to give it a 4.
Yeah, I gave it a 5, just because, again, I'm not experienced in Scotch. I don't know what to really expect out of this, so I'm going to be polite and give it middle of the road. Taste. I said 6. I liked how sweet it got. I wasn't expecting that.
I actually am going to give it an 8.
Okay.
I really liked the taste as it entered the palate, as it moved through the mouth. I thought it had a great, great taste to it.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm going to go 8 as well. I completely agree with that.
On the finish, I gave it a 7. I mean, I know that Scotch is supposed to be smoky. I know that it's coming, and it definitely did. It showed up. This is the kind of thing I could sip on for a half hour to an hour at a time. This is a really good, slow sipping whiskey.
Yeah, I would give it a 7 on the finish. For me, that I never understood what people talked about when they said that it had a peaty or a peat kind of taste to it. I get that now.
Yeah.
Like, it definitely does. And this sounds bad, but it kind of tastes like grass or like...
that mossy,
that kind
sort
of mossy,
earthy
taste. I never thought that sounded like a good thing, but having it now, it's not my favorite finish, but it's interesting and it's fun and it's unique.
Yeah. Jen, how about you?
I said 6.
Yeah.
It sort of reminded me of this throat coat tea that you drink when you want, your throat to be coated with something, and it lingered slightly more in a textural way in my throat than I really wanted it to.
Sure.
Yeah, that's about it.
I get that. Okay, so overall balance. Now we're talking about from the time we smelled it to the time it was in our stomachs. If something really sticks out to me, that takes you down a few points. I want a consistency. And for me, the nose was the thing that really stuck out in a negative way. So I would give the balance a 6 overall. I liked the later stages of the mouthfeel and the taste and the finish, but the nose really didn't do it for me.
Yeah, there was so much movement from nose to taste to finish that I'm going to give it a 4. I struggled with the balance. And maybe it's one of those things where if I had this more often and I got used to that movement, I might like it more. But right now where I'm at, I'd say a 4.
Jen?
I said 8. I thought it was kind of fun to go through those stages. I'm like, oh, here's this one and this and now that. It was kind of fun. to ride that wave.
So looking at putting all the scores together, I came out to a 23 out of 40.
I was at a 24. Jen, I believe, was at a 31.
Yep.
30 million.
That actually, since our preview episode, that's the first 30 anybody's given. So this is a pretty highly rated one. Okay, so overall, we're looking at a score of 88 for all three of us combined. So like a 29.3, which is, I mean, that's 3/4 of the way up our metric here. That's
pretty high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we just average out me and Brad, we come to about a 23.5. You know, and actually, I think that this is probably a better whiskey than a 23.5 would indicate.
Yeah, looking back at my scores, I might be able to raise it up a little bit. But yeah, 23 to 25 range for me is about where it would sit.
Again, for like a non-Scotch drinker, this is a Scotch I would keep on my shelf.
Yes.
For sure. I paid, I think, about $30 for this.
It's not that bad.
That's not bad at all. I mean, that's a standard price of a fifth of whiskey at this point. You know, that's not bottom shelf.
Right.
And for what you're getting for $30, like, I think it's a heck of a value.
Great value.
I think it's the perfect introduction to Scotch for someone who doesn't typically drink it.
Definitely.
Yeah, if you're somebody who drinks whiskeys and, you know, Canadian whiskeys or bourbons and you want to try a Scotch, you want to kind of move into new territory, Monkey Shoulder would be a great way to start that.
So, Brad, would you recommend?
I would recommend.
I would as well. Jen, recommendation?
Definitely.
Endorsed by all three of us.
Ba, 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 ba.
That might be the first one that's ever been endorsed by three people at once.
I wouldn't say it's great, but it's good. It's fun. It's interesting. It's an adventure.
So that's Monkey Shoulder. What do you guys say we get back to talking about $1 Million Baby? All right, so that was Monkey Shoulder. Really good blended Scotch. My glass is empty, and I wish that it wasn't right now. So let's get back into talking about $1 Million Baby. There are so many directions we can go in terms of ethical dilemmas that are being brought up, themes we can explore. I think one of the big ones is something that Jen wanted to talk about. So why don't we go into that right now?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about, I thought an obvious theme of this movie was poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ultimately the story of a waitress who's been working in the service industry since she was 13 years old, trying to get by on minimum wage.
Right.
So a lot of things that popped into my head were how, you know, people like Bernie Sanders says the minimum wage should not be a starvation wage.
Yeah.
So she's literally stealing half-eaten scraps of food off of plates just to kind of ward off hunger.
For sure.
There is a sense, though, that she is also paying for a membership at a gym and buying boxing gloves. And so there might be a sense of if she spent all of her money on food, she might not have to steal as much. So she does have a larger goal in life than just survival.
This gets me into like thoughts, though, of is this movie kind of just what people think poor people should act like? Because she's always kind of chasing a goal and she's actively trying to get out of poverty, and she's, you know...
So she's the ideal poor person, and her family are the not ideal.
Exactly. Like, her family... We don't know what her mom's condition is, but time and time again, we're told, my mom's obese, and, you know, I don't want to live like that. And her mom is presented as being dependent on welfare and not wanting to get out of that situation. And it's very clear her family is portrayed as the most negative characters in the whole film. So I wonder what's trying to be said about poverty in this movie. Is it just that, you know, Clint Eastwood's like championing pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps?
If this is the only movie I ever saw about poverty and I were in poverty, I would be a little bit offended that the only portrayal of it really is that I'm kind of telling my daughter who just bought me a house, look, I don't even want this house because it might take away my disability and then I'll have to work.
Well, and then that gets us into also the conversation about disability in this movie. And I know, and Jen did some research as well, disability advocacy groups were just pissed after this movie came out because of the way that they perceived it as portraying disability as just basically a death sentence.
Right. So one critique of this film about disability was that it presents a problematic portrayal of disability in many ways. The first way would be that it presents disability as a death sentence. So if I'm disabled, it's better to be dead. And there were also a lot of disability activists, like you said, who called for boycotts of the film. because it advocated for people with disabilities to be euthanized. And then some critics also said that it provided an unrealistic depiction of disability by pointing out that the kind of bed sores requiring amputations would likely not have arisen in the kind of upscale nursing home she was in, and definitely not that early into her stay. And then some other critics pointed out that since 1990, there have actually been laws in place that allow patients to, like this who are conscious but quadriplegic and on a respirator to just ask to be disconnected from the device. So he might not even actually have had to go through the act of killing her in the first place.
Right. Which makes the question then, why was it necessary in the context of the narrative of the story for him to kill her? And we actually watched this really interesting video on YouTube from this channel called Just Right, W-R-I-T-E. Go check it out. And his argument was that the disability advocacy groups kind of missed the point because the movie was making this really larger, more kind of like meta commentary on disability as a whole, and that they portrayed poverty as a disability, they portrayed obesity as a disability, and that they portrayed dependence as disability. And so Maggie comes from a background where her mom is poor, obese, and dependent on the government. And in order to be successful, she has to reject that entire way of life and become rich, physically fit, and independent. And so when she lands in a hospital bed, she's fighting against this idea of dependence again. And so her physical disability is just an extension of her mentality through the whole movie, which is life isn't worth living if I have to be dependent on somebody.
I think that's why they kept saying, that's why her character in the hospital bed kept saying things like, I've seen the whole world, I've traveled, I've been able to achieve my dreams. I don't know how I can go back to that lifestyle. I think kind of supports what you're saying. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, you know, not to tip our hands too much, but Brad and I both went to seminary. We both work at churches, and we have this worldview that human life has value, and in all its forms and all its stages. And I watched this movie especially, and I'm like, what is the point that's being made about a valuable life?
Yeah, and I think the big thing here is that if we're talking about dependency and disability being the main negative factors portrayed, then what's the opposite of that? Productivity? Because as soon as you see Maggie's productivity cease to exist, she considers herself worthless.
Yeah.
And that's where we talk about the value of human life. What makes a person valuable? Is it their productivity? Because if you look at that, then I think there's a case you can make where her mother is not productive at all, so why don't we euthanize her?
Well, and that's they're passing judgment on her for her inability to be productive. And you know, Brad and I kind of fall on different ends of the political spectrum, but we were just talking a little bit about Clint Eastwood's character in this movie, and I struggle not to read Clint Eastwood's personal political beliefs into this movie. He's come out on record a ton and talked about his libertarianism. He really hates the idea of people being dependent on the government for anything. And I just wonder if this movie is his large sort of, you know, old man screed against people being dependent on anything. And because it has really, really deep moral implications. Like, she doesn't want to be alive because she's dependent. And Eastwood is portraying a life well lived as never being dependent on anybody.
I agree with that. I actually was really upset with Clint Eastwood's character in this movie, especially when he was approaching her with those college pamphlets and he's like, hey, you could go to school. I'm thinking to myself, wow, he didn't even really try that hard to convince her. He's just kind of handed her the pamphlet, and of course, someone in that, I don't blame Hilary Swank's character at all for her reaction, her response to this tragedy based on her past experiences. That's all set up for us very well from a writing stance. But then you get into the fact that she suddenly is saying, oh, life's not worth it. No, I'm not going to go to school. He doesn't even really try to sway her. He just kind of scoots the pamphlets aside and then makes a plan to euthanize her.
Yeah, that was something that bothered me a ton. And I think that's an area where, you know, the disability groups that got upset with the movie really have a strong point. Is the movie just barely gave lip service to the idea of living a meaningful, purposed life while being disabled.
Absolutely.
And that was something that just, I remember when he said that, you could tell he was just giving lip service to it. It was just this sense of like, well, you could go to college. And it almost felt like Clint Eastwood was like, but real people don't go to college.
Yeah.
Like that's just meaningless.
Right. So there's one more thing that I think we should talk about, and it's a big theme in the movie, and that is the idea of what is love. And
Baby, don't hurt me.
How does Clint Eastwood love Hilary Swank's character? It's very clear that they form a father-daughter relationship, and it is very explicitly laid out by Paul Haggis in the script.
What?
Yeah, I know, right?
No way.
Like, oh, I lost my daddy. And she's like, he's like, I lost my daughter. Wow. All I have is you, Frankie. So it's very clear. My question is, in the context of this movie, what does it mean to love another person? And the conclusion that the movie comes to, which I don't mind that it comes to this conclusion, is that Eastwood his character rejects the advice of the priest, who says, if you do this, you'll be lost. He immediately goes and talks to Morgan Freeman, who basically gives him the opposite advice, which is, you need to do this. He goes and does it. The music resolves into this nice major chord telling us that he did something good. And then at the end of the movie, we see him in this diner eating pie. The implication is that he's been redeemed. And so what I think this movie is telling us is that loving somebody is necessarily giving into their requests, even if their requests hurt you personally. So, I mean, is that an interpretation that we agree with? Is that what we think love is? And what is this movie really saying in terms of that?
Maggie walked through that door with nothing but guts. No chance in the world of being what she needed to be. A year and a half later, she's fighting for the championship of the world. You did that. People die every day, Frankie. Mopping floors, washing dishes. And you know what their last thought is? I never got my shot. Because of you, Maggie got her shot. If she dies today, you know what her last thought will be? I think I did all right. I know I could rest with that.
So with love as a major theme of the movie, which I guess I wouldn't have necessarily seen right away, love being a major theme, but I think the more you talk about it, I think we might have done Maggie a disservice to say that all she was after was making herself so that she wouldn't be dependent on anything through money, physical fitness, all that stuff. I think she genuinely was looking for love and relationship and community.
Sure.
And she found that in that boxing ring with Morgan Freeman, with Clint Eastwood.
Right.
And so, yeah, but what do we say about love when it asks us to do something like, hey, I'm worthless now, so kill me.
Right.
And instead of trying to convince her of her worth, he kills her.
Right.
I think what it brings up about love in the two ways that it presents it is there are people who love you, who say they love you, but they don't, their actions don't support it.
Right.
There are people who say they love you and their actions do support it. So her mom's saying, this is my daughter, I'm here to take care of her. But really, she's just literally shoving a pen into her mouth to try to get her to sign away all of her money to her.
Really subtle, that stroke. Paul Haggis is a master. Oh, I hate this script so much, guys. No, but I agree with you. And one of the things that I've struggled with is I can be okay with a movie's mastery, even if I disagree with the moral conclusions that it draws. But I don't know that this movie really draws its moral conclusions that well.
It doesn't, I didn't feel a lot of closure to a lot of the questions that it was asking.
Yes.
That were big universal themes, like you said. What is love? How can you get redemption? It doesn't try to answer those things. I mean, it attempts to, but it doesn't ultimately do it.
Yeah, and again, like I don't mind that the answer that Eastwood gives us is the rejection of religion. Because again, religion is a form of dependence, right? It's being dependent upon what the priest is telling him to do. And in order to escape that, he has to defy what the priest tells. I don't even mind that. What I struggle with is that it's still kind of muddy what they're actually saying is the right thing to do.
Do they have to tell you what the right thing is to do?
No, they don't. But then that's where we get into like, oh, is it just like a really masterful, ambiguous ending, or is it just poorly written?
My problem with it is, off of what Bob said, is that sometimes Paul Haggis spoon feeds things to us, and he gives us, puts things right onto our lap and makes things so obvious that when things aren't obvious, it kind of bothers you as a viewer.
Yeah.
Because everything else is so spoon fed to you.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's somewhere where a director like Scorsese shines out brightest, is that he doesn't just spoon feed you things. He takes you through the narrative and allows you to come to your own conclusions throughout the movie, so that at the end of his movie, when things aren't clear, you're not left hanging.
Sure.
Whereas in this movie, you really are left hanging, where, like you said, you're just spoon-fed all these ideas on life and poverty and all these things. And then at the end of the movie, it's just kind of like, okay, well, now it's a choose-your-own adventure.
Exactly.
And it really does, for me, it comes down to that last shot. It's all about how you interpret that last shot. And I'll give them credit that there are two ways to interpret it. But if you interpret it as Frankie has been redeemed by what he did, then it really is condoning every other problem that we've talked about, which is disability is a death sentence. Poverty is essentially, it's a form of disability, obesity, and it's a rejection of all these things. And so in my mind, if you view Frankie as being redeemed at the end of the movie, then it makes the whole movie more problematic ethically.
And the thing is, I think that if you just take the movie based on its own merits, I would say they are viewing Frankie as redeemed.
Oh, I would think so too.
The music pushes you towards that. The way the shot is that kind of nice, quiet fading, we're just going to leave Frankie here and let him live his life out. It definitely views him as redeemed.
Right.
Especially because his character had changed so much from the beginning to the end. I mean, even when they were on the trip, he asked her, or just before they went on the trip, he asked her, okay, well, how would you like to travel there? And she just says, I'd like to fly there and drive back. He goes, well, how do we do that? But he was willing to do it because you could tell in his past relationships he regretted not having taken time to do things that people he loved wanted to do and also enjoy the small moments.
Sure.
They have a lot of small moments together on those trips where they're just kind of eating pie and saying, oh, have you ever had a dog, Frankie? He wouldn't even have engaged in a conversation about, have you ever had a dog? With a trainer, a trainee as a trainer prior to that scene.
Which we see with his first fighter. I think his name was Willie.
Yeah.
His first fighter, he would have never had a conversation like that with Willie. Everything was about the boxing.
And I will say this, going back just for one last second to the acting in the movie, we talked about Hilary Swank not having much to work with in some ways, but I think that those scenes with Frankie and Maggie in the car together, the dialogue is so obvious of my daddy had a dog named Axel. And I was like, oh, this is not foreshadowing at all, but they sell it. Those quiet moments in the movie are the best parts of the whole movie in my mind.
It's the sincerity that shines through.
And I don't think we give enough credit to Eastwood as an actor in this movie either. I think this might be his best screen performance that I've ever seen Clint Eastwood give.
I agree with you. He has a lot more range in this movie than he's ever had before. Usually he shows up as a tough guy or as a kind of an older, wise guy like Gran Torino, who has kind of things figured out and he's here to save the day.
Yeah.
And in this movie, he's vulnerable. He's trying to change, trying to get redemption, trying to figure out what is love. What's the right way to love somebody, given the fact that I've maybe not gotten it right in the past with my daughter.
Absolutely. And again, Eastwood was in this phase of filmmaking where he made Unforgiven, which is his way of deconstructing what's a Western. Why are we idealizing the Old West? It was violent, it was cruel, it was cold and harsh. And I feel like in some ways he's doing the same thing with us as viewers of sports here. Why do we watch people beat on each other? These are the results that you don't see behind the scenes. And this is where the real humanity comes in, is in these moments of working with a paralyzed fighter and dealing with the ethical implications of that.
Which you also see, he works with a paralyzed fighter in Morgan Freeman.
Right.
In the sense of he's half blind and has difficulty living his life. It seems like they make him have an addiction to gambling, Morgan Freeman. So he's already worked with a fighter. And with this one, he takes the path that he does choose.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up a little bit, guys. What would you say, if you had to score the movie out of 1 to 10, what would you give this film?
Man, this is such a hard film to score because I think going into it, I think there's certain aspects of the movie that were very heavy-handed, which we've talked about. Haggis has a very heavy-handed script. But it's the sincerity of Hilary Swank and Clint Eastwood that sells it for me. I would give it a 9 out of 10.
A 9.
Yeah.
Jen, what would you say?
That's exactly the number I was going to give it, 9 out of 10. Because while I don't 100% agree with the criticisms that have been made, and I didn't really feel that 100% when I was watching it, I would say that I would give it a 9 out of 10, just because it had so many good qualities, but also some problematic elements.
Yeah. I think that you have to give credit for what Eastwood is doing with form here, like with the genre. This is something you hadn't seen in a sports movie before. And you have to give him credit as a director for that. My problem is that if a movie comes to a conclusion that I don't agree with, as long as it makes its argument well, I'd get it. But I still don't know what this movie is trying to say. And I think that's what bothers me. And I don't think it's because it's like so well crafted. I think it's just kind of muddied a little bit. So I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. Yeah, I used to love this movie a lot more. And the older I get, the more I realize how problematic a lot of the aspects are.
Huh, that's interesting.
Would you recommend this movie?
I would highly recommend the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not I would recommend it in the fact that it opens you up to think about the suffering in the world.
Sure.
And as much as you might not want to watch movies like that all the time, I think part of the beauty of film is it allows you to escape reality. But another side of the beauty of film is that it does allow you to interact with situations that you might not have been through with an emotional attachment that is very real. You are emotionally attached to Clint Eastwood's redemption, to Maggie's story, her rise to stardom and fall. And so I think it allows you to create an emotional attachment that you might have never had in real life, to think about an issue, not only through the lens of logic, but also through the heart of the matter and how you feel about things.
Absolutely. Jen, how about you? Recommend?
I would recommend it. I would also keep in mind, though, that as a teacher, if I were teaching my students about poverty, this would be the last film I would show.
Right.
Because I just think that that's the kind of the most problematic element of it, is that it portrays people in poverty as kind of wanting to hang on to their welfare checks and not contributing to society, whereas there are a lot of people on welfare who are kind of physically disabled and not able to contribute to society. So I would have liked to have seen either her mom be sort of like the mom in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, where she's so morbidly obese that we can't even see her positively contributing to society.
Right.
But because I can look at this woman, like Brad said earlier, she's just not that obese and she could contribute.
She's just lazy, is
right.
what they give. Yeah.
It gives it a very bad light, I would say.
So we want to hear what you think, though. So hit us up on Twitter @FilmWhiskey, or if you want to yell at me for my semi-negative review of $1 Million Baby, you can.
7 is still a good.
7 is still, well, it's semi-negative.
Yeah.
You can call our call-in line at 216-800-5923. Leave us a voicemail. We'll play it on the air. Once again, that's 216-800-5923. We will be back next week talking about the 2004 film, The Aviator. For the Film and Whiskey Podcast, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And I'm Jen Lowers.
See you next time.